Okay, picture this. Between the 13th and 17th centuries, the Indian subcontinent is going through some massive political turbulence. I mean, huge cultural collisions. But instead of just being erased or wiped out, the local culture does something absolutely spectacular. It adapts and it thrives. Welcome to The Explainer. Now, take a look at this quote. Mahatma Gandhi actually perfectly captured the whole thesis of this era. He talked about remaining resilient while still welcoming the winds of change. How do you let global cultures enrich your home without entirely losing your own foundation? And honestly, this isn't just a modern question, right? It was the exact literal challenge faced by millions of people centuries ago. So, let's look at Section 1, the roots of resilience and the ancient foundations of Indian culture. Because, well, you really can't weather a massive storm without a solid foundation. So, here's the thing. Unlike other ancient cultures, think Mesopotamia or Rome, that eventually got diluted over time, this incredibly vibrant shared way of life in India stood remarkably strong through the millennia. We are talking about a totally continuous lineage here. Languages, knowledge systems, artistic traditions, all stretching back thousands of years. It's essentially a cultural bedrock that's defined by a scientific temper and rich philosophical traditions, passed down generation after generation. And as you can see, long before the major clashes even began, this region was already this open, super welcoming hub. On one hand, we've got the Greek scholar Megasthenes, and on the other, Arab spice merchants. You had visitors coming in from Persia, Central Asia, East Asia, and they were bringing all these new cuisines, fashions, and social norms with them. The indigenous culture didn't just build a wall to keep them out, it actually absorbed these elements and grew so much richer and more diverse because of it. Moving on to Section 2, a clash of worlds focusing on the 13th century crucible. Because this period, it brought a literal ideological earthquake when the new rulers arrived. You can imagine the stark contrast between these two worlds created some massive friction. On one hand, you've got monotheistic Islam, right, with one prophet and a very distinct worldview. And on the other, you have this indigenous belief system featuring multiple schools of thought, super diverse practices, and no single holy book. Historically, when rulers arrived with militant versions of their faith, they often tried to annihilate indigenous beliefs, and this clash actually led to the plunder of some of the oldest sacred sites. It created a very, very real fear that the native culture might just be completely suppressed. Which brings us to the absolute ultimate mystery of this explainer. How on earth did this cultural shift survive such a violent storm? Think about it. More than a millennium after these initial encounters, both the native belief systems and Islam continued to be practiced right side by side. How did they avoid total cultural collapse? Well, the cultures stayed afloat thanks to three highly adaptable life rafts. First, everyday people just kept their traditional practices alive in their daily lives. Second, diverse rulers unexpectedly stepped up to patronize local arts and literature. And third, society actively chose unity over division through just massive grassroots participation. Let's dive into Section 3, the power of Bhakti and devotion from the grassroots. This was just a massive surge of cultural energy welling up directly from the people themselves. What is so truly remarkable about this accessible path is that it completely bypassed formal priests, complex rituals, and elite knowledge. Even though it originated centuries earlier, the Bhakti Marga experienced this huge resurgence during all this tumultuous time. Basically, it allowed regular, everyday people to find spiritual resilience by connecting with the divine. And they did it through their local languages, through poetry, music, and dance. It was deeply democratic, emphasizing love, compassion, and true equality. Just look at the incredible diversity of the people coming together. Figures like the 16th century Saint Chaitanya Mahaprabhu united people across literally all social strata through pure music and movement. Saints like Mirabai out in the west and Purandaradasa down in the south, they held these gatherings where bhajans were sung. It brought people from absolutely every background together, offering them immense emotional strength during some really uncertain times. And I love this point right here. The 15th century weaver and poet Kabir broke down those rigid religious walls using something everyone understood: flour. He taught that once you grind wheat, the individual grains just vanish into one unified substance. Ram and Rahim, representing the divine in both traditions, are ultimately the exact same truth. It turns out baked goods are a pretty fantastic metaphor for fundamental human oneness, and this message just resonated massively with the public. Okay, Section 4, the Sufi path, an inner search for God. Because just as Bhakti was totally transforming indigenous practices, Sufism was offering a fresh, deeply mystical dimension to Islam in the region. Essentially, Sufism shifted the focus way away from strict orthodoxy. Instead, it offered a really personal, highly musical journey characterized by an intense, all-consuming love for God, which, if you think about it, is very much like the Bhakti saints we just talked about. And these mystical saints commanded so much respect. I mean, even mighty rulers like Emperor Jahangir, pictured right here, sought out their company. They essentially acted as a vital bridge between the absolute top of the empire and the everyday people on the streets. Sufi ideals were literally permeating every single level of society. Practices like zikr, which is the repetitive chanting of divine names and the singing of qawwalis, fused local classical styles with totally new traditions. Famous Sufi saints like Nizamuddin Aulia heavily encouraged music as a powerful vehicle to connect with the divine. By blending imported musical styles with traditional Indian classical frameworks, they completely bridged the gap between different communities, and they did it through the universal emotional language of music. Moving right into Section 5, a cultural synthesis, the blending of currents. This is where the true magic of cultural survival actually happens. Rather than destroying one another, these parallel movements actually synthesized. They shared these beautiful themes of oneness that kept traditional practices alive, all while beautifully integrating new ideas. The poets and saints from both sides basically realized they were climbing the exact same spiritual mountain, just from different sides. This overlap resulted in an absolute explosion of enriched literature, poetry, and art that celebrated unity. It fundamentally changed the cultural landscape, and definitely for the better. And seeing physical, joyous devotion like this, it seamlessly blended right into ancient traditions. The whirling dervishes, practicing their moving meditation, actually fit perfectly alongside the ancient Indian Natya Shastra texts, which had long established music, dance, and drama as literal pathways to the divine. The culture didn't break, it just expanded. It expanded to include the tambourine alongside the tabla, and the whirling dervish right alongside the dancing Bhakti saints. So when faced with the massive winds of change, we don't have to build walls, and we certainly don't have to be blown off our feet. By finding common ground in love, art, and our shared humanity, we can create a synthesis that's richer than anything that came before. Which leaves us with this big question. If a culture can endure and even blossom during centuries of immense political turbulence, how might we apply this beautiful blueprint to the cultural divides we face in our modern world today?